Welcome everyone. I'm Arti Rabikrasoon, founder and MD of Prerna Advisory here in South Africa.
Hi, I'm Deepika Trehan, the founder of a women leadership development platform, Corporate Diva, based out of India.
We'd like to welcome you today to our episode on the healing touch to leadership. And joining us today is our very special guest, Dr. Colleen Lightbody.
Thank you.
So let's, welcome Dr. Colleen Lightbody. A tad of introduction, her area of expertise is in neuroscience, trauma, stress, managing grief. She's done her PhD in mindfulness and comes with a colossal knowledge on healing per se. And we're going to leverage this opportunity of interacting with her to bring in the healing touch to leadership. Welcome, Dr. Colleen.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Wonderful.
Completely our pleasure to have you here. I'm going to quickly just, jump into the questions that so many of us came together and had for you. And that's why to start with, I'd like to know from you that, what does healing and transformation for leaders actually mean?
Well, I guess the word healing actually means or implies that there's wounding or there's some kind of pain. And unfortunately, this is often really not acknowledged in organizational contexts, but even in personal contexts, we don't really teach people how to work with pain, move through trauma, experience grief in a way that is holistic and supports the progress and the healing of whatever it is a person's been through. Even in our individual context, people often don't work with the pain that they're experiencing. We try to avoid it with different mechanisms. So I think the word healing really is about that we need to acknowledge that pain exists in ourselves and in other people. And then transformation is about how do we transform organizations to be organizations that acknowledge difficulties and challenges and trauma and grief, particularly right now, and support their people to work through very difficult experiences.
Absolutely. And I love what you said, because there is that distinction, Colleen, between the healing and the transformation bit. And as you mentioned, it's such a difficult time we're finding ourselves in at the moment. And obviously we're talking a VUCA world, but more so with the pandemic. Do you feel like leaders today are just so inundated that they're not actually taking that time out, even for their personal healing, that personal context, to even be able to move it towards transforming part of the organization or even the people in the organization?
Yes, I mean, I'm a coach, as you know, and what I've noticed is that I'm almost doing no coaching anymore because people are really traumatized. People are really challenged. And not only in terms of leading people, which is challenging enough because they're leading people who are traumatized, grief-stricken, bewildered, anxious, fearful, all of these things, but even managing themselves in those contexts. And somehow we just haven't given people the language to be able to do it. So when I say I'm not even coaching anymore, I mean that people aren't setting big, hairy, audacious goals, getting excited about career development, and that people are kind of hanging on by their fingertips right now. So, and a large part of what I'm really doing with leaders is teaching them that the importance of acknowledging their own difficult experiences and helping them become mindful, become present with those experiences so that they can work through them, as opposed to pretend they don't exist and just work harder or use a substance in order to avoid the pain, or whatever device people are taking or using to avoid having to actually work with what is actually occurring to them.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, what I've noticed is that a lot of us are also in denial, probably because, a lot of us perceive as healing in particular as something maybe that's religious or spiritual, or it's a therapy that they need to enroll in for. So would you help us understand what exactly is healing and how is it different from therapy per se? and interest in nature?
Sure. So, sure, three questions, but I'll I'll try and weave them together. You used an important word there. You used the word denial. Now, I don't know if you've ever come across the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross process of grief.
Yeah, I have.
Kubler-Ross, sorry.
Yeah.
It's late in the afternoon. So a lot of people argue it because they say, because when you read about it, it seems to be a linear process. It was also devised or studied with people that were going through end-of-life experiences.
Yeah.
However, if we understand her process is not necessarily linear, but almost cyclical, that we go through different stages, denial being one of the first stages. The first stage is actually immobilization, where you know that feeling when you hear bad news, suddenly you know that there's going to be riots in a city nearby you, which is just a bit close to us right now, or your loved one has been taken to hospital, whatever. You know that moment, immediately you kind of brain freezes. Now this is, I'm going to bring in the brain a little bit because obviously that's my area of expertise. This is a neurological survival response to anything negative or anything that we perceive as a threat. And of course, a loss, bad news, any of that we experience as a threat to our lives. In actual fact, our brain experiences it as a threat to our lives. So immediately what happens is the body pumps out adrenaline, or the brain sends the message to the adrenal glands to pump out adrenaline, okay, which gets the body into action. But immediately that the brain pumps out the adrenaline, there's a corresponding neurochemical called cortisol that is released. Now, I think you're probably putting two and two together here because cortisol is your stress neurochemical. Yeah. So what is happening to people is that they are, that immobilization is the adrenaline pumping their body, getting their body ready for action, but disconnecting their thinking processes. Because when you're in a dangerous situation or when you're in a threatened situation, you do not want to think, you want to react. Okay, so that denial, that immobilization is kind of it's our prefrontal cortex, it's our thinking processes going offline and our brain readying it and our body readying itself for survival. The rest of the process that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about, it's immobilization, it's denial, we have bargaining, we have anger. Anger is that kind of overwhelmed, not being able to cope with the news that we've experienced. And in fact, anger is an interesting one because I say that anger is sadness turned inside out. You know, that early part of the grieving process where you feel angry about something, you actually, it's actually because you can't deal with the sadness because it's just too intense and too much. Yeah. The bargaining is this kind of disbelief going, this can't be real. You know, it can't actually be happening. Yeah. And then finally, we start, well, before we move into acceptance, we go through a stage of depression, which is kind of depletion of our resources. So just to make the link to what everybody's going through right now, we have to understand that grief is a loss, okay? And there's many losses that we are experiencing now. We're experiencing the loss of certainty about the future. We're experiencing loss of loved ones, vulnerability ourselves, loss of incomes in some instances, not sure whether you're going to have a job or not. So we're facing this threat, many different kinds of threats constantly, these losses, and our brain is responding to it in the same way as if we're losing a loved one. It's a trauma response, it's a grief response. So we go in and out of these different phases, and sometimes you go back and forward. But what a lot of people don't understand is that it's a process that you have to go through. We can't avoid it. Yeah. Okay, so why I'm giving you a language of the grieving process here is if leaders just understand any emotion that they are feeling or any emotion that their staff are feeling is understandable, and it's okay. No emotion is bad. It's just a reaction to an experience. It's how we support people to navigate those emotional states and those difficult phases, and how we support ourselves to navigate it. That's really important. Right. I don't know if I answered you.
Well, I mean, that was just a beautiful way to encapsulate the grieving process, the emotions underlying it, Colleen. And I think it was very useful for us to actually look at it from that neuroscience sort of perspective as well, because we often are so overwhelmed. We don't know what's going on. And sometimes, as you're saying, we move through these different phases of grief so quickly, we traverse back, very cyclical. And you know, as you were talking, what I was thinking of was, I can imagine a leader who's probably going through one of those phases themselves, you know, but at the same time having to still show up for everybody else. And I'm just wondering, you know, and in your experience in this time now working with leaders, how are they dealing with it at those different stages? How are they dealing with that self-acknowledgement that I'm here, I need to do something for me, and then I'll be able to do some stuff for others, or in tandem? How is that working?
Yeah, because I guess it is both and, because they're still leading people. So how do they show up? So I think the important message of what I'm saying to you is, I'm having a language and an understanding of what it is that we're experiencing. Just to begin with, is actually a handle on what it is that we're experiencing. Unfortunately, we, in our society, in our culture, we haven't, and this is global, by the way, because I teach this all over the world, is that we don't give people a language for emotions. We try to avoid them. We perceive negative emotions as being something that is bad and there to be avoided. Okay, but in actual fact, if you are living in this world, you are going to suffer. If you love somebody, you are going to grieve, okay? Because it's part of the process, but we don't ever teach people how to navigate it. So I always say, if you had to think, Artie, if you had to think of a graph of your life, okay, where you've got wonderful experiences, terrible experiences, great things happen, difficult things happen. So you've got a graph of your life, okay? What we've created this, and in organizations particularly, we've created this belief that you've got to live above a horizontal line that's across the middle of that graph. It's not okay to be down there. We've got to be above there, okay? We medicate, not that I'm saying medication is bad if it's necessary. These books, you know, these self-help books, like Search for Meaning, you must be purposeful, you must be happy. That tells us that we've got to stay above that horizontal line. But Artie, let me ask you a question. If that graph is your life, where have you had your greatest learning experiences?
Absolutely below the line, if we had to look at it from there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Above the line is wonderful. Yeah. Above the line is wonderful. It's a relief, you know, thank goodness. But it's not, and we can practice things and we can do things when we're above the line, but it's not the time when we develop character, wisdom, courage, resilience. We do it in the tough times if we want to, okay? But we spend our lives avoiding it. So one of the most important thing I'm talking about leaders, but I'm talking about anybody, managing himself or being present with other people that are going through difficult times. One of the most important things that you can do is acknowledge the pain, validate the pain, or validate the emotion. So if you are feeling sad, what we do is, I shouldn't feel sad. No, sadness is part of life. And the amazing thing is that if we accept and validate the emotions that we're feeling, they actually lose their power. So I teach mindfulness, mindfulness meditation. And when we're dealing with physical pain management, we actually teach people to focus on even chronic pain, on the chronic pain, to pay attention to it, to notice the quality of the pain. And it's the most incredible thing. The pain relieves, as opposed to what we usually do is try and avoid it and shouldn't be feeling like this now. I wish it wasn't, exactly. So in the same way with emotional pain, I teach my clients to say, okay, I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling bewildered, or I'm feeling vulnerable, or whatever it is that you're feeling. First, to have a language, because most of us don't even have a language for our emotions, but then to go, what does sad feel like? To be present, to be mindful of sad, or mindful of angry, or mindful of whatever negative emotion it is that we're experiencing. So that's the start, is to actually first notice the emotion, not run away from the emotion, be present with it and validate it. We spend our entire life saying, don't worry, don't get upset, don't be afraid, don't take it. We tell people how not to feel. Okay, now, Artie, let me ask you a question. In the history of your entire lifetime, has anybody said to you, don't worry, and suddenly miraculously worry disappears? No. Okay, but that's what we do.
Never. If anything, the alarm bells is going off even more.
Absolutely, absolutely, because that's called suppression.
Correct.
Okay, and it's going, I promise you, those emotions are going to go somewhere. They're either going to be repressed and eventually emerge, and not always very productively, or it will go into your physiology, into your spiritual world, you know, and it'll come out in some way or another. So validation, acknowledging emotions, validating emotions for ourselves and for others, because we not only tell everybody else, no, don't worry, don't be afraid. You know, my worst thing in the whole life, the whole world, is when people say, no, don't worry, they're in a better place. I want to go, have you been there? Do you know that for sure? You know, it's, no, I'm sad, I'm grieving, this is a loss. So acknowledge the sad. So firstly, to acknowledge it, but also to validate ourselves, because we are terrible at saying, I shouldn't be cross, I shouldn't get upset, I have to get over this, I've got to keep, no, you've got to be present with your emotions, and emotions are okay. Sad is not bad, it's just sad. Okay, so validate, accept. The best thing for a person is another person. The worst thing for a person is another person. Okay, so be the best kind of person. That's how you also accept, validate, witness, be witness to another person's emotional state, and your own. Okay, be witness to it, notice it, see it, experience it. Where am I in my body? Am I feeling this sad? What does it feel like? That's curious. You know, experience it, and then share. Okay, create connection, the right kind of connection, because that's what supports people. Now, what I'm talking about, sorry, I'm talking a lot here, but what I'm talking about here really is about a leader not being overwhelmed by other people's dark experiences, okay? Because people are going through them, and it's not your responsibility to rescue a person from that experience. First of all, you can't, because a person has to go through it themselves. And secondly, you, if you're rescuing somebody, you say, if I'm rescuing you from a difficult situation or difficult emotion or anything, I'm saying to you, Artie, I don't think that you've got the capacity to actually learn and grow and find your own resilience and wisdom in this. I, the great superhero, will come in and swoop and rescue you. No, I need to be the sacred space that allows you to sit present with your emotions without me taking it on and trying to avoid it, deny it, or fix it.
I think that was really insightful. In fact, I'm going to, take the lead from there, Colleen. And, when you were talking about that, people tend to be that I'm going to be the superhero and I'm going to take care of things, and I'm going to. So one thing that comes into my mind is that, with the people that we interact, we often also know that the one feeling that's been really attacked in the times of pandemic is that feeling of helplessness.
Yes.
And so a lot of us land ourselves into grief, just feeling the pain of others and feeling that sense of helplessness.
Yes.
Now, how do people navigate through that? Can I indulge in healing myself to pass on the healing forward to somebody? Or, again, that superhero thing comes in that I cannot do anything for you, so I need to step back. So would you like to just throw some light there?
Well, I mean, sometimes helplessness, we almost just need to sit present with helplessness, you know what I mean? And not be afraid of it. Again, like anything that is supposedly negative, if we're present with it, what does this feel like? That's curious. What is it? What impact is it having on me? So often when we're present, we're trying to avoid it. And what we're trying to avoid by not being helpless, it means that we're trying to control an outcome. And the truth of the matter, Deepika, is that we have no control over the next 5 minutes. In actual fact, we don't know if a meteor is going to fall out the sky and crush your house. Okay. So actually that need to control, we think is the strategy for us to feel better, but in some ways it actually makes us more vulnerable, because then something happens that we can't control. So I know this sounds very peculiar, but it's almost that helplessness is we are helpless in actual fact. So just acknowledging it, being present with it, and being in acceptance of it, because it's when we deny things that we don't manage them. And the irony, or not the irony, but the amazing thing is that when we understand that we have no control over another person, we have no control over what is going to happen in the future, then we are able to navigate our experiences from a present-centered state. Instead of hoping for the future, worrying for the future, fearing about the future, we're able to stay in the present. Now, when we are in the present moment, Deepika, there is no worry, there's no fear, there's no regrets, there's no despair, there just is the present moment. That's it. There just is the present moment. So that is really, what I help my clients do, and I won't say to them, get into the present moment, but what I'll say to them is, tell me about how that's feeling. Just notice what's occurring in your body. Or I'll say to them, in what way can you be the best version of yourself in this very difficult circumstance? What is the wise advice you need to give to yourself? And what I'm doing is I'm getting them out of that narrative of fear and worry and anxiety, and I'm getting them into the present moment to say, breathe, this is who I need to be, and this is how I choose to stand and navigate these difficult circumstances. And I think leaders can, that compassion fatigue is a real thing. Especially if you're an empath, you feel other people's feelings. But when we just shift our thinking to the fact that we can't rescue a person from their difficult experience, but what we can do is sit and be present, be a witness to their difficult experience, and help them find wisdom, help them find their center, or help them even grieve if that seems to be the point. But it's not our journey, it's not ours to take on. Yeah. It's tricky, it's hard to do that. But when we truly realize that we have no control over what that person's life journey is, or even our life journey, we have no control over it. When we sit with that, then often it becomes a much more powerful place to be that secure center for somebody else or for ourselves.
Mm. I love that.
That's something that's really needed to be understood, because while you said that, there are two sides to that coin as well, because if you leave someone to their, and allow them and give them space to grieve or to handle pain, you're also perceived or judged by your social ecosystem as though you're not concerned about the individual.
Yeah, but it's not about avoiding it. I went through a very traumatic experience when I lost my brother, and everybody disappeared. Suddenly nobody was around anymore. Because why? Because other people can't bear seeing your pain. So they bring casseroles for the first week, but after that they kind of disappear because their pain and seeing your pain becomes unmanageable. Yeah. So we need to have the courage, and we need to have the wisdom to be able to be present with other people's pain, but not take it on us, but be able to be present. It's a very powerful space to lead from. It's a very powerful space to parent from. And it's a very powerful space for self-compassion as well.
Yeah, it impacts all these different stages and phases and facets of our life. I think you're quite right about that, Colleen. So, I think what I'd love to know is, how do we actually sort of become more present then as leaders, whether we're leading ourselves, leading for others? What are some of the things that you could sort of offer as advice or ideas of what leaders can be doing now to be more present, feel that moment, hold the space?
Well, I think just because I think people like to understand the why. Yeah. And from a neuroscience perspective, you're in two different circuits, in one or another circuit in your brain. The one is the narrative story, which is usually in the past or the future, worry, fear, anxiety, regrets, etc. Or you're in the circuit of direct experience, which is in the present moment. You're in one or the other. You know what it's like when you get in your car, you drive somewhere, you don't even realize you got there because you were so lost. You weren't present, with what you were doing. So literally, we can train our minds. We can train our minds to be in the present moment. It's like, if I want to be a great tennis player, I'm not going to walk onto the court and hit a forehand like Roger Federer until I've spent hours and hours and hours of practice. But don't get overwhelmed, because even tiny amounts of practice start to develop the muscle in your brain to be able to be present. And what is the what is the training, what is the gym to develop that muscle is meditation. Okay, and now people want to run for the hills because they're going, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to light incense and start chanting. But merely practicing mindfulness meditation, which I'll just demonstrate to you quickly. Okay, for one moment, listen to any sounds that you can hear around you. Now listen to, feel any sensations in your stomach. Now notice your fingertips. Just pay attention to your fingertips. You might feel them tingling or pulsing. Now notice the muscles in your face and just soften the muscles in your face. So what I just did there is I brought you into the present moment by helping you pay attention to sensory experiences. And by the way, there's many senses, not just the 5. We've got a sense of temperature, a sense of air pressure, a sense of balance, there's loads of senses. But just paying attention to any sensory experiences, breathing is often the one that's used. That brings us into our present moment. So that's what mindfulness meditation is just paying attention. So you can go outside and look at the sky and notice the leaves and feel the sun on your shoulders. That is being in the present moment. And that is training your mind to be able to stop that narrative that is so destructive and to feel centered, grounded, and find our courage.
I love that. I love the.
It was so amazing that, you know, the moment you said to acknowledge and you brought focus when you voiced out certain parts of the body, like your fingertips and your face. And, you know, there was something that I noticed that the moment you mentioned face is when the muscles went loose.
Yeah.
Right.
Before that, you hadn't noticed that your face was like,
yeah. I mean, yeah, true. That's powerful.
Absolutely. The power of the voice and the power of focus. And it makes me think about, you know, this can actually help somebody bounce back, you know, whether you're sitting with, you know, having to be and show up with others, whether you're sitting with your own sort of emotions at a particular stage in that grief curve. Colleen, I think, you know, the whole idea is we want to be able to heal and come back and bounce back and bounce back a better version of ourselves as leaders, as people. Your ideas around that, and the conversation is going so well, but I'm kind of going to ask you to wrap up maybe with something along those lines in terms of how can we then uplift ourselves? How do we come back from this and be the best version of ourselves now?
So I'm also a little allergic to being in a difficult circumstance and going, there's a reason for this, or, you know, I need to find purpose, because that kind of denies us the experience as well. But at some stage, yes, exactly that, is that we are going to have learned from it. We are going to reflect on the circumstance at some stage when we're ready to, and see the learning, see the growth, see what it gave us, what the gift of that difficult experience was. Okay. Now, I'm not subscribing to the belief that this pandemic is a great course correction for the planet, or that the dolphins are now going to float up the Venice canals, because I don't think it's a great thing. I think it's very, very traumatic and very, very difficult. But we know that we shall emerge from this with wisdom, with character, with resilience, and with courage, if we allow ourselves to be present and to experience it and to gain that wisdom, knowledge, etc., etc.
Wonderful. Deepika, anything from your end as we end off?
I think my key message, especially about bouncing back, was that you've got to allow yourself to learn through the process. It's a process, and we've been through maybe we were probably caught unaware in this process, but now that we're in, we've got to just soak in the learnings, understand and take the learnings and put those learnings into action. So when we're saying bouncing back, we don't bounce back the same as what we were. We probably bounce back with higher levels of knowledge, if not anything else, right?
We can choose to. It's a choice.
Yeah, I love that. It is a choice, and it's a choice for us to actually ensure that we are taking the time for ourselves. If anything, as we've been saying, Deepika, this is a pause, and it's time for us to take a little bit of that conscious pause, take that time to actually heal, feel, be present, be part of the moment, but then actually then transform ourselves to be present again for ourselves and for others going forward.
Yeah.
Dr. Colleen, it's been a
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful time talking to you. Thank you so much for your insights and your knowledge. Deepika and I both appreciated it. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Namaste.
So much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And to our viewers, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And if you have any questions or comments, our contact details will be on the bottom. So do get in touch with us. Thank you all.